Hello and welcome to Slick Talk. My name is Blackstone Joe and you're listening to episode 56. Before I get the ball rolling, I just want to give a quick thank you to all of our listeners that took time and responded to our most recent survey. Attached to episode 55, if you are not familiar, on this survey we asked our listeners to submit content ideas, shows they would like to hear from us over the course of this new year. If you haven't had a chance to respond, if this is your first time hearing about it, you can go to the link in the episode 55 description. I'm going to leave that survey link live, so even if we've released a few episodes since then, you can still go in and put in content ideas that you would like to hear from us. Truly, your suggestions play a key role in the content we provide. We're never going to run out of ideas in and around the building, just between our own personal experiences, what we come across in the lab, but we want to make sure that we're tailoring our content to your interests. And as a matter of fact, it was one of those suggestions that we're going to delve right into today, and that would be the world of aviation. Specifically, we're going to talk about what we found in a couple of oil filters that we were inspecting recently. Now, filter analysis is something that you can do yourself. So there might be some folks listening that already do filter analysis on your own, and that's fine to do, especially if you've had experience and you know what you're looking at. You're able to identify the metals present. It's not something that you have to seek out a third party for, but in cases where you're not familiar with what you're looking at, it is definitely helpful to have a guide early on. I had the quote, "It takes a village," come into my mind recently. Usually you talk about it takes a village to raise a child. Like, me personally, I don't have a kid, at least not yet. But I do have like a stray cat that comes around the house. And the neighbors and I, we see to it that this cat's taken care of, like during the colder months. They have a heated shelter that we help pay for. And then we're the ones that put food out. And then we have another neighbor who also puts food out. So things far less serious than raising a child can take a village. But something else that falls under this category, I think, is taking care of an aircraft. Not only do you need a good pilot, you need a good A&P, and you can also add in oil and filter analysis to that list as well. Recently, it was my turn to take a look at filters in the lab. So yes, the analysts that write your oil reports, they're also equipped to check out the filters, analyze the contents, and write up a filter report. It looks a lot different than an oil report, but in similar fashion, we are looking to identify potential concerns. And since we're not running the oil through a spectrometer, since we're not measuring viscosity, doing those physical tests that are such an integral part of an oil report, we have different methods and a different set of means to arrive at a conclusion when we're looking at filters. So first I'll walk through the process with this Lycoming TIO 540 that I was checking out. So this was an instance where the customer had just submitted pleats, about 37 in total. So already removed from the filter housing. If you're unfamiliar with sending in a filter, you can do that. You can either send us the pleats or you can send us the entire canister as well. So in this particular case, we were looking at a significant amount of ferrous, i.e. steel, metal present. Now, the nature of that is obvious in that it's reacting with a magnet. So metal that the magnet pulls up, that's going to be from steel parts, and we gave a approximation of how much metal was present per pleat, but we also found aluminum as well. And the nature of aluminum, you can tell it's present by the reaction to hydrochloric acid. So you'll see the acid reach the metal and then it will dance around before ultimately dissolving. But it's fun to see that reaction when the acid first hits it. You can tell by the way it's moving around, reacting to that acid, that it's aluminum. And lastly, we also found brass and bronze. Not a significant amount, really. I remember looking at the filter pleats, and there was one notable piece of brass bronze. If you're unfamiliar, there's also a acid in play when detecting brass bronze. That'd be nitric acid. So we didn't find a notable amount of carbon, really anything else to write home about, but the metals we found, not the brass bronze flake, but aluminum and iron were definitely noteworthy. And then we paired our analysis of the metals with what we were finding in the used oil. Now, in the used oil, we were seeing increases in aluminum and iron, significant to what the engine was typically producing. So you combine what we found in the filter with what we found in the used oil, and there was reason to proceed with a very careful approach. A borescope inspection, we want to check out cylinders for one, but you can also have that iron be from cam followers as well. So there's a couple different things going on here, and we want to use these different sets of facts to help the customer arrive at a next step as far as maintenance and addressing what could or could not be a problem. It's a lot like building a case, and I believe I used that analogy back in episode 48 when I was first talking about filters, but it's fresh now because last night I was watching 12 Angry Men, and by the way, if you haven't seen that, you should definitely watch it. It's on Prime right now, by the way. So if you have an Amazon Prime subscription, take an hour and a half and watch an amazing, I guess it's technically a courtroom drama, but it all takes place in a jury deliberation room, and it's, about how facts can be construed, and you have to put bias aside and do your best to analyze everything in front of you to arrive at a conclusion. So yes, 12 Angry Men relates to filter analysis. I bet you didn't see that connection coming. But yeah, I love that movie. But now I want to switch gears and talk about another filter we were inspecting, because this one had a couple of findings that aren't problematic. And I want to unpack what can show up in a filter other than metal that isn't reason to assume a problem. First things first, we had what looked to be a piece of paint, and we also had what looked to be sealer debris. So the nature of paint, it's not something that you can detect just by, reaction with an acid. But if it's non-magnetic, does not have a reaction with acid, and it breaks apart easily, you can break it apart between your fingers, it's very non-resistant, then look to be probable paint. There's also what looked to be sealer. You can kind of tell that based on the color and the fact that obviously in appearance it's non-metallic in every way you can describe it. So you can find this type of debris present, especially when you aren't finding a lot of excess metal to go along with it. It's not something that you want to list at the top, of your concerns in an oil filter report. Now, we also found carbon. And now carbon is something that, you don't want to see it caked in there, but it's bound to be there. You're going to have some carbon in the filter. And, in general, you want to see a filter that's been doing its job. So a filter that has some carbon present, that's kind of what you accumulate in the line of duty. So it's not something that you need to label a concern either. So keep in mind when we're talking about filters and what you can find in them, not everything's going to be a concern, which is why if you're entirely new to the world of filter analysis, building a trend, getting a couple of filters under your belt where you can see what is typical for your engine, well, that's really important period for any engine, really, not just aircraft. But understand what can be present, what is typical, and then proceed with noting what is unusual. And in making these evaluations, one great aspect of our reports is you aren't really just taking our word for it when we describe the metals. In an oil report, we have our comment, but you can also see for yourself the wear levels. You can see all the results and reference exactly what gave us that conclusion. And in a similar vein, in a filter report, we're going to provide pictures of the different types of metal debris. We're also going to provide measurements that we took. And when you're evaluating these results on your own, you'll be able to, as you sample an engine repeatedly, see what we found in each filter and see how those measurements compare. And we also provide the reference point of an image of each particular type of metal that is present. So Trends matter, not just for an oil sample, but for filters as well. And it was actually during this last round of filter inspection that I took part in where we came up with the idea for our next episode for you. So I talked earlier about how it matters to analyze filters not just for aircraft, but for vehicles as well. Well, my coworker Brandon, a lab operator, he has a Mustang, and this happens to be a 2007 GT500 with the 5.4-liter supercharged engine. He was finding what looked to be pretty concerning amounts of metal in the filter, and he combined that with oil analysis to see levels that were increasing on a microscopic level as well. After analyzing the oil and the filter, it became apparent that there was going to be a major rebuild of the engine. Now, I'm going to have Brandon sit down with me. We're going to talk about exactly what we found in the oil and filter. We're going to talk about the rebuild process, everything he needed to do to keep that Mustang on the road. So if you want to learn more about how we run analysis in the lab, how it can be used practically to save an engine, quite literally, tune in for that episode. We'll have that one coming up next. As a reminder, that survey link for episode 55 is going to remain open. So keep sending in content ideas. Right now, we have a healthy list that we're going to be working through. Thanks again to everyone who took the time to respond. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And don't forget to leave a review for our show as well, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, any platform that gives you the option to leave a review. Not only is that good feedback for us, it helps out a lot with those algorithms to make sure that we're always visible and at the top of a search list when you're looking for anything related to a show like ours. And in addition to our podcast, you can expect more content on our YouTube channel. So far, we've released videos on the viscosity and the flashpoint. We've had great feedback on these videos so far. We're going to keep them coming. We're also going to put together a video timeline sort of tracking the kit packing process to the customer receiving it, to sampling their vehicle, to sending it back to us. We'll walk you through all the testing again so you can see from start to finish the Blackstone experience. That brings episode 56 to a close. Thank you so much for sticking with me. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.